Holiday Hijinks, House on Haunted Hill is an independently developed visual novel. Like the adventure games of yore, this genre focuses very heavily on storytelling and writing. Unlike adventure games, however, there's no exploration or even puzzle solving. As such, these games tend to rely very heavily on having great stories and writing, even more so than RPGs. Despite it being such an integral part of the game though, I won't give too much away about the story, for the same reasons why one wouldn't give away the twists in a book review. What I will talk about, however, is the way in which it's told and how its world absorbs the player. Hijinks has two protagonists and switches between their points of view throughout the story. The first of them is a paranormal investigator named Jack, who's been called in to sort out a ghost problem at an old mansion with his partner Erin. These two have the usual sassy girl and snarky guy dynamic, but their exchanges are still entertaining and a couple of good lines do help to endear the player to them, like when Erin calls Jack out for monologuing about the haunted house. The other hero of our story is a young man named Nick, whose role is much more confusing. He and his friends, Liz and Jenna, talk during their introductory scene about how they're at a Halloween party. For children. But they complain about having spent $4,000 on the thing, which made me wonder whether they organised it. But Nick says he works there and they're in college. And then there's this fourth member of the group called Kinuko who says she's there because where she was originally at got called off because of a bomb scare. I don't get it. Fortunately though, this confusing introduction for the students doesn't really matter in the long run. It's really just an excuse for them to wind up in the same mysterious basement that Jack finds himself in while investigating the manor. Very soon the group learns that the basement is crawling with all sorts of monsters, from gargoyles to werewolves, that they can either drive off or enlist the help of in order to find the exit. Along the way though, they learn that this is all part of a much bigger story, one involving an ancient demon, a nefarious conspiracy, and talking animals. Huh. As you may have guessed by now, the game really lives up to the hijinks part of its name, going for more of a comedy horror approach. Actually, it's far more comedic than it is scary. There are one or two legitimately good jump scares later down the line, made all the better by sudden shifts in music and simple but effective graphical changes, but for the most part the tone is light and the dialogue consists of characters taking sarcastic potshots at each other. Considering how short the game is though, it's a huge surprise that they were able to provide all these characters with such diverse personalities and even a bit of development for them all. Another point in this game's favour is that it's really pretty to look at. A great amount of effort clearly went into the character portraits and the backgrounds are all suitably atmospheric. You're never confused as to where you are, and there are some darkly comic bits of background scenery that add to the silly tone of it all. The few songs the game uses for its soundtrack are also good, with the villain's theme music being the standout song, but the first few tracks do get repeated a bit too much for them to keep being effective. I also have a few complaints of the plot's structure. It's decent for the most part, but there's a bonkers side story between the talking dog Inukan and a sinister cat-like demon. It's honestly one of the most interesting parts of the story just for how creative it gets. Unfortunately, not a lot is made of it. More is implied and told rather than actually shown, and the human characters walk away apparently thinking little of it. That brings me on to another issue, specifically that while the game has a good idea having all these fantastic terrors running around, it really doesn't do much with them. Each one is there for a scene, you get its help or drive it off, and then it just vanishes, never to be heard from again. My third and final storytelling complaint is that while the game does try to involve the player by presenting them with dialogue choices, none of them really do anything. Reactions vary at the time and place you make your decisions, but none of your choices will ever really come back to bite you in the back or open up new paths. This isn't a huge thing since, as I've said before, the main story is entertaining, but I went through the game twice and couldn't find any hidden scenes or alternate endings. As such, I don't think there's any replay value, which is quite a shame because this is a world I'd really like to see more of. Since I admit to being new to this genre, I don't know if it's a staple of visual novels, but I do think an opportunity was missed to add to the feeling of suspense. Despite all of that though, I am going to give Hijinks a recommendation. It's a short and sweet little game with a couple of good gags and the odd shock you can power through in 20 minutes. In fact, its short length actually makes it ideal for those who've never played a visual novel before, as it just lets them sample a few minutes of what the genre's all about. It has its flaws, but the characterization is solid and the writer clearly has a good imagination. I for one would love to see some kind of continuation, or maybe an expansion pack of some description that makes more hijinks happen on Haunted Hill's house.